school of Nasibin, which is a high school. It's starting there, and then that's not the only school. There is another school. They're trying to revive the language again, and they're making it a language of science. You know, they study chemistry, physics, math, history, everything. All these curriculum in Assyrian language. So that's what they did 1600 years ago. The language that we speak it daily, you know, they made it language of science and theology. It was structurally improved, enriched with new terms and vocabulary, developed with many genre, poetry, and prose. Bible. They almost interpreted every book of the Bible. Not one time, hundreds of times. In addition to the hundreds and thousands of poems and passages, also stories were inspired by them. When they have these stories that were written, inspired from the Bible. Liturgy and sacrament. Almost everything in liturgy was explained and interpreted. And the church adopted many of these writings in its liturgy. Thus, these writings became immortal. And I just want to, again mention that we have a book of prayer, Tawad Khudra. I can confidently say that half of that book is of Marnase and Marabrim, who were the teacher of this school, and the rest of 35% of it is of, you know, either the other teachers or students of this school, and the 20% is from later or somewhere else. Like 80% of that book is a product of the school of Nasibi. Theological, philosophical, and dialectical writings that shaped the culture of the church, theology of the church. Many of these writings were destroyed due to division and dispute, but that doesn't mean they did not influence. Still, its influence remains. Linguistic books and dictionaries. Of course, we have some books of grammar, some books of dictionaries that still we can still use them. In the encyclopedic books, like Marabrim, religiously, all his poems and writings are, they are considered like the encyclopedia of our church. Marnar say philosophically and theologically and humanely, Nashai. And Mariaq or Mariyu scientifically. They have like books on math, on stars. And there were not many books focused on history. Litvan Robert Kawe was this. Translation. This the school will begin the great bridge between the civilizations, especially the Hellenistic and Eastern civilization. They translated a book of Aristotle, Socrates, and philosophy, done. Spiritually and aesthetic literature, indirectly, because those writings were mostly written in monasteries, and we know that that was a school, it was not a monastery. But these people who graduated from this school, they went to become monks in monasteries, and they wrote some of the, according to Father Robert Bulai, who was my teacher in spirituality and philosophy, he said that the literature of spirituality of the Assyrian Church is one of the greatest literature in the whole history of Christianity. The writers were Yochanan Taliata, Sahdona, Shimon Taibute, Jibril Qatraya, Yosef Qatraya, Ishaq al-Ninwi, and so on. Significant event, and then we'll just go back on what we did and we studied in the first century. Just highlight to remind you, the the rise of, till the 4th century, Modiwa, the rise of apostolic see and organization of the church under the head of Marpa. The church was organized like all other churches. Religious freedom in the Roman Empire, an edict of Milan in 3813. That impacted, the relationship of Christians and Persians. The two first ecumenical Council of Nicaea, and it was 325 AD, and the first Council of Constantinople, 381. And in the first one was against Arius, who said that Jesus is a creature, is created by God. It's not Son of God, but he's the highest creature. Of course, that's why they say Barkiana Dawi in the nature of his father. I don't know how they say it in English. In English. لا أتلخ خبرخينا. Do you know the creed in English?
Yeah.
How do they say, like, in the nature of his father, Jesus?
So you can say consubstantial.
Consubstantial, yeah. And Arius believed that he was not God. He was created by God, but God through him, and he was the one who created the whole world. Anyway, so, and now there's a lot of, if you pay attention to some of these Amrach that they call themselves churches, and if you listen to them, to their theology, they're really saying that Jesus is, they're Arians, they're saying that Jesus is a human being, but he has divine power. That's how they present it. So we have to be very careful. It makes sense, like Arius, by the way, even after he was condemned in 325, even after that, he has a lot of influence and a lot of followers. Even the emperor, after Constantine, followed him. And, he took, Marathonasius of Alexandria was the one who fought him. And actually they put him in jail, and many years he ran away in desert because they were trying to kill him, just because he was defending the true faith. But why? Because this makes sense to us. And every time God makes sense to you, that's not the God. Remember that. Because God doesn't make sense. Boom. And then Constantinople, there was I forgot the name. He said that the Holy Spirit is not God. So Gudawa, it was Basilius and Gregorius in Nazianzi and Gregorius at Nisi. Anatre, Nazianzi was the brother of Basilius. These three people had a lot of influence on this council, and they confirmed that the Holy Spirit, it was because of this council that was entered in the creed. Okay? And of course, the next thing was the highlight of this 4th century was the persecution we mentioned, and the establishment of the school of Muslimin, Edessa. That was one of the highlights of the 4th century. The other highlight that is not very clear is among the people in general, start the awareness of living, in isolation, dedicating their life to service, and then that was, of course, developed to become monastery. But in our history, Bnei Qiyama, يعني بنون الأولى, children of covenant. Of course, بنون قيام وبنات قيام. They were not supposed to live in one building together. Women by themselves and men. Main reason for that was to do service. Like they have these places people visit, Qadisha, whatever. So they would come visit, stay there for, like Damkhig Umrah for days, if this child is sick or this man is possessed, they will stay in the church. So these people dedicated their life and time to serve those visitors. They called them Qiyama, or Bnat Qiyama, and then that was developed to become a monastery in the 5th century. Ben, what time?
Almost 8 cents.
Huh?
Almost 8 cents.
Let's take a break, and then after this we will talk about monastery, about schools, about Manqam Shara. That's why you must know Oh yeah, I was going to tell you about this. The laws. How's it doing?
Yeah.
All right. شوي منزلنا مخيك مكتابة. For those of you who like, last time I showed you some book in Arabic. So today I'll show you some book in English. The Lost History of Christianity. It speaks about some of the, you will see some of these province, dioceses that we don't know anything about them now. You know, they're lost. And this book is talking about these old, you know, in Merv, in Maru, to Samarkand, to Russia, Azerbaijan. We had some parishes there, dioceses there. So the book is talking about these.
What's the name again one more time?
The Lost History of Christianity.
Okay.
Yeah, by Philip Jenkins.
Okay.
This speaks about the school. الخلفاوي شمو برخل شبه أربايا علتا مدرسيات شد أسر مدرسة في تأسيس المدارس. So this book is actually taking the book of Barkal Shabo, speaking about the schools, and he's explaining all these rules and how the curriculums and everything about the school of Nasibin.
What's the name of it?
Fear of God and the beginning of wisdom. Beautiful name. بريش خمتا دخلت المريا, but he's لا دخلت المريا إلى ريش خمتا. Adam Becker. And this book is the Church of the East Ancient History. I think the Chronicle of Sirt. This book is actually was found in Arabic. I just know what it is. إلى تاريخ السعردي بالعربي أطيات قارئ تشعيثة سعرت يعني because it was found on this town Sa'ad, which is in Turkey. It's called the Chronicle of Sir. It's one of the valuable resources of the churches. Unfortunately, it doesn't speak any. We don't know who wrote it. هنا الديشير مطران سعر قد ما تشخلق library دي لو بضايمين. So قديش هو متروبوليت الصعب كلنا عون إلى scholar. He was a scholar. Okay, so, and those are, these books are not mine. I borrowed them. I will tell, when you read these books, there are two parts of History of Christianity in Asia by Muffet. It's gonna make you mad. You know, it's gonna really make you mad. Because sometimes you think like أنا أمريكا كتير بس they sound so stupid. You know, like theologically كتير يمسني بس الدين أخنا نحكي لبعض theology. But it got من ديانة by any information, historical information. Do not pay attention to his theological analysis of the church. Make your battle. أحكي قريت بس you know, it's information about تشريعها بس it's good. Okay? So, this, I sent it to you. You know, we're not going to study this. I'm just going to show you, like, if you want to count how many, after you go home, how many provinces we have and how many dioceses, bishop dioceses we had in the 5th and 6th century. You know, why do we need to know this in this particular time? Because when you read a book like that, like this, the follower of Nestorius, they flee, they escaped from Roman Empire, and they went to the Persian Empire and they built a church there and established church there. And you know, the people there are called Nestorians. But actually, you know, before Nestorius, I'll show you how many dioceses and how many parishes there were in the Church of the East. Okay? So that's one of the reasons we study this. And the other reason is we don't want to just study the history. You know, you can read history in many books. We want to just understand the structure of the church, you know, the dynamic of the church. That will also, it's kind of part of like ecclesiastical theology, theology of the church. Okay? So the church was rapidly growing, and you know, during the Sasanian period, even though it was persecution into Indiana, all these never stopped Christianity. Actually, Christians, when they were killed, if you read the history, the biography of these saints and martyrs, you see that a lot of people, when they were seeing them being killed, and with a smile on their face, they were becoming Christian. They would say, you know, these people are not dying for no reason. I want to know why they are smiling like this. And they were becoming, a lot of people that were becoming Christians. So even though the Christianity was, you know, destroyed and people were being killed, but God was always attracting more people into Christianity. From the time of Marischal, 399 to 410, he died after his first synod. Synod, what's synod like? Synod is a meeting of the assembly of the church. When they meet, the patriarch, metropolitans, bishops, they meet to discuss about the church. They call that synod. Okay? And the synod is always consists of the patriarch, the head of the synod, and all the bishops, all Allani, كل Allani. Patriarch Allani يمري لكنوشة سنادقاء. Synod in English. The Synod of Marissa was the first synod in the history. That is documented. Maybe there were others, we don't know. We know that Mar Papa had one, but was it a synod or was just, you know, a meeting to discuss? But that's what synod is. But this is the first synod that's documented, and all these synods were printed by Shapu, Kha from Science. Is it on the
Yeah,
slide, Khalid?
Yeah.
Okay. Now firmly established in Persia, with center in Nasibin, Qiswan, Gundishapur, and several metropolitan sees. The Church of the East began to branch out beyond the Persian and Sasanian Empire. Okay, in the 3rd century, and before that, we know that church was already moving outside the Sasanian Empire. During the 4th century, the Church of the East began to group themselves into regional clusters, looking for leadership to the bishop of the chief city of the region. What does this mean? I know it's not that clear, but it means that, by the way, I just took this from a website, Wikipedia, and I just cleaned it. It's, it is, of course, I compared it with I had 2 books of Delhi. Emmanuel Delhi was before he was patriarch, it was his dissertation, شمائل المؤسسة البطريركية, the patriarch institution of the Church of the East. It's in Arabic. المؤسسة البطريركية في كنيسة المشرق. I compared this information with that book and some other articles in the magazine of Bet Nahran and Najm al-Mashraq. So, I just clarified them. So, what does this mean that, people were clustered around? That means we have in church, we have metropolitan, and then within this metropolitan, يعني metropolituta, mar'ita وتركية metropolita, eating episcope. Every metropolitan has to have at least 3 bishops to make that city a metropolitan, at least. But not all the churches that had 3 bishops around them will become metropolitan. But in order for a city to become for a church to be metropolitan, it has to have like at least 3 other cities around it or in that region that has bishops. Okay, so that's what happened. Like these people were grouping together and putting the bishop of the big city. They call it metropolitan or archbishop in Catholic. Islam, there is no archbishop. There is metropolitan. Archbishop يعني رئيس الساقطة. احنا لدنا رئيس الساقطة. شيء metropolitan. This process was formalized يعني in the Synod of Mar Iskhab. This process was formalized. يعني what they did by themselves was made formalized. So they say this is metropolitan plan, and this is going to be the bishop, the metropolitan, and these will be the bishop diocese under his jurisdiction, and so on. Okay? So, the first asserted the priority of the Grand Metropolitan of Salib of Qisman. Patriarcha ipash mujbinna metropolita rabba. Patriarch is considered the great metropolitan, or grand metropolitan. He is just metropolita. He has bishops. Mar'it al-Patriarcha. He has bishops, but Modi, because he is the grand metropolitan, he is the patriarch over the whole church. So, in the Synod of Mar Iskhab, there were they assigned 5 geographical-based provinces by order of precedence, like and like when they sit in the meeting, the highest place will be to who? Patriarch, Kharta Bet Huzayed. Second will be Nasibin, Meishan, Ghdaya, Kharta Bet Garme. Bet Huzayed is in Ahwaz. It's like south not south, it's in west, south of Iran.
Southwest of Iran.
Southwest of Iran. Okay?
Abadan.
أحواز وعبادان. لا بس. إتلن نصيبين. It's in north of Mesopotamia. إلى قامشلي تدية. قامشلي سوريا. It's around there. إتلن ميشان إلى ميسان. عمارة وبصرة. ميسان. برضه قبل بيش تري. عمارة بنوشو ميشان بنوشو بتلاقط إلى بصرة بنوشو. خكمة جاي قاريلة بتلاقط خكمة جاي قاريلة ميشان. بتلاقط إلى بصرة تدية. At that time was called بتلاقط هل تيلون أرباي they called بصرة. And Nineveh was called Nineveh هل تيلون أرباي they called Mosul. Before Arab there was no Mosul. Today it's the city of Erbil and all that region. It's called Gdayl. That whole muqata'a is called Gdayl. Bet Garmay, which is Kirkuk, and around the area around it is called Bet Garmay. So this was the order. Of course, just so you know, Nasibin was left to this higher than these two in this meeting. Before that, Nasibin was just a piscopa, and he was a bishop. They made it metropolitan, and they put it the second after Bet Uzai. And because of its influence and the school and the great population that there was there, nobody said anything. Nobody opposed. Metropolitan principal number, first media, Kurakistan, elsewhere mentioned. So, this is number one. This is a patriarchal لخلا أيا area كل إيوا مرعية البطريركيا. See, this one. Number two إلى علام ين بتلاق علام ين أيا بيت هوزاي. It's this أهواز. See, it's south. It's in Iran now. And number three is Nasibin. Here, number three. This area, Nasibin, and Meshan, which is Misan, ila number 4, Lakha, Aya, Meshan, Kharta, number 5, ila Khdayaw, Lakhawa, number 5, of course, Abay Iwa Minno, Kulla, all this area, 5 and 6, Ifishawakrita Ato. Metropolitan Lakha, they call them Metropolitan Atur because Atur is أي إلى آتور Assyria, وبدأوا إيوا part of Assyria, so they call it Metropolitan Atur. Like Itlan Gewagis Atur, Metropolitan Atur, and إلى also Metropolitan Baghdad.
Kasha, at the time where church Mutita wahal China, India, Vita Radana Katviani le modern Patriarcha. Different, how much?
We had two patriarchs at one time, but not by choice.
No, I'm saying by just for the expansion reason.
No, idea.
Okay.
So they were called the first. These were called the interior interior provinces, and of course. This one, the Meru, Kazakhstan, Lakha, Aya, and these, Tajikistan, Kharta, of course, after that, in the 7th century and the 8th century, Aya Kulla, there will be one here, and then in India here, and then in China, it will grow much bigger. So, أنا يقاري الانتيريور أنا إلي internal أنا إلي جواي مرعيات الجواي أنا إلي مرعيات البراي. What's the reason? The reason is that because they were very close to this, so those were the only metropolitan that they were allowed to elect the patriarch. And then they didn't have to come. Only these 5, Dina Lacha, of course, with Metropolitan Keshkar, with Episcopal Keshkar, when the patriarch died, Episcopal Keshkar will take over and call the meeting. So we'll come and we'll elect the patriarch. Most likely they would choose another person, like either Rabban or Kasha or Episcopa, but never Metropolitan. Few times. Lela Kharul anyway. So it was province of patriarch. La كما اتلا كشكر اتلا diocese of Beth Armaye أن كل إلى around بغداد وبلده من كركوك وإلى خرطة. Kashgar was called the Natar Kursia, the guardian of the throne, and was assigned, of course, and he was formalized. Albat Aha was assigned by Marmari, according to the tradition, but was formalized by the First Synod, Mariska. And then diocese of the Sportad Malike, which was the Yamrin Masyaf Malika. The king during the summer would go to this. That's Sportad Malika. Piruz, Shabur, Tirhan, and Betraman, or Anaiwa, 7 were under the jurisdiction of the patriarch. And then it was Ilam with Bet Huzai, they had also 8. And then Nasibin, they had also 7. Actually, more than 7. 11. Misan, it was 3 and 4. So 9, order will clear that completely. And then 3 more here. No, this is in Yamin, sorry. Arbil, Aywa Nohadra, Ubedgash, so on. So Duhuk, you are Gudain. Kharta Malta, of Malta. Anyone been in Duhuk? Duhuk? Duhuk, you are Episcopa Etwala of Malta, Etwala Episcopa. إلى أدية إلى almost one town. أدية إلى almost one town. وخارطة نينوى, diocese of Nineveh. Of course, see, just so you know, these all were mentioned in the synods that took place. So they were mentioned in these places, these bishops. The last one in the Kirkuk with Germay, which also has 8 unlocalized. Khaitma, Iwa, Rikha, they were far from the metropolitan, but Pinochet, they call them unlocalized dioceses. And then exterior provinces, Itwalam Faris and Arabai, Ila, you go down, Khalij al-Arabi, Uanne, Hal Amman, Hal Marin, yeah. Itwalam Bishop bu Amman in 424, Muscat, Amman. Yeah, all the way down in Qarta Khoristan و Sigistan إلى Russia, إلى Russia. Itwalam Metropolita Tama, Gudayam Ditewa Metropolita, ومروا إلى Gudadka وقريش إلى باسو. أن يقبقر على lost Christianity. It was a very big. Those Christians were the one that ran away and deported. But when they signed, and how do we know? When they signed their name in the synod, they call themselves like Bishop of. Let's say, Bishop of Meru, Ayrud, the deported Bishop of Meru and Ayrud. That means he was deported from his country to this place. And then we have Media and Bitmadaye, also to Hamadan, to Iran. I asserted Robert because of we only know these two people who were in it. There were more bishops probably, but there were only these two who were mentioned in the synod. And it was Ray and Kabaristan, and then it was Azerbaijan, and they were already established before 410, before Nestorius by 30 years. Okay? So that was the reason I mentioned this. 15 minutes. So, the 5th century, probably أنا من هنا. So, أخذت جوجن. أنا ما كنا كجوجن أمس. Yeah, and I'm clear left fashion. So, in the 5th century, there were like 5 synods that took place, and these are the most important synods in the church history. Synod Amaya with Marishat that organized the church and the liturgy, that put the foundation of the church organization and history. Marda Disho that gave the dependency to the independency to the patriarch. Actually, in this synod, we believe that the church became ecclesiastically separate from other churches. Lewa because of the persecution, but because the dignity of the patriarchal see. Because what happened is some of the bishops rose against the patriarch Mardad issue, so he just left the seat and he went to Hira. There was this place that was a Christian diocese. It was Christian, but all Arab dioceses. They speak Arabic. They're all Arab, but they were Christian. Family of Ghassasin and Manadira. So he went there, and then all these bishops, the one that supported him came, and Agha the metropolitan of Proclamation, of Ahwaz, he stood up and he spoke and he gave a long speech. And in that speech he said that the patriarch of the East is right after Christ. No one is allowed to judge him. Only Christ will judge him. So from then, he said, from now on, we're not going, to ask for Western bishop fathers' help. We have this patriarch here, and he's the reference to all our problems. And if he cannot, solve the problem, then we'll leave it to God. He's, to Christ. He's the head of the church. So من دقيقة خينا أم رفعي تشغل إيه شوب استقلالية ديو خينا لاوي خشدة الكسروم every time they have problem.
What year was that?
424. It was actually, this was not a meeting, a synod, but it became a synod because of all these speeches and this decision that they were taken in that meeting. And then we have Mar Aqaq, which was the patriarch during 467, 486. He also held a synod, and in this synod they were trying to, let's say, clarify the faith and where the church stands from all this division that were taking place in the West between Nestorius and Carolus and Antioch and Alexandria. And then Marbawe in 497 they took formally declared that they accept the faith of Nestorius as the true faith, and they denied the faith of Carolus and Chalcedonian. In our church, as we saw, like we had structure. Like there's patriarchal provinces, and then metropolitan, and then bishops. So what's the role of the patriarch? Patriarch is called Metropolita Rabba, Grand Metropolitan. In the till the 5th century was called Catholicos, and then somehow in between, like in the middle of the 5th century till the 6th century, the name of the patriarch was added. So from then he was called Catholica Patriarcha, Catholicos Patriarch. Hadia Qadishute Mardan Kharwi'a Catholica Patriarcha. This started in the 6th century. Probably the first one who, in my opinion, but Khakmanash, they don't confirm this, was Mar'awa, who made this title formal. And then Patriarcha have the authority to ordain metropolitan and to give shumlaya, we call it, tathbit, or like if the bishop is ordained by the metropolitan, he has to receive a letter of recommendation or not recommendation, recognition by the patriarch. Otherwise, he cannot take responsibility. He cannot start his his service unless he get that Tawad Shumlaya from the patriarch. He is the one who calls for the meeting for the synod, and but the power, the authority of the synod is over the patriarch. Okay, so patriarch has the power over every individual person, but that synod has the power over the patriarch. The patriarch is elected by 5 first interior provinces: Bet Labab, Bet Lusayan, Nasiwin, and Nation, La, and Hudayl. These five metropolitans has to bring at least 3 bishops with them who come and elect the patriarch. Other bishops, they cannot. They have no right to participate in the election.
How is it now, Rabbi Kashem?
هذه كل الأشياء. And by the way, Mar Yosef also in the 6th century, he tried to bring everybody, but because of the difficulties, of traveling in Aya, he could not succeed. So they went back to the old tradition. كل metropolis. Yeah. Now because it's easy, so all the synod, the whole synod, gather and elect patriarch. Patriarcha Gereklaha Vigvira. Of course, I'm speaking not now, 5th century. Patriarcha is supposed to be single, not married, but Barsoma Tile, and he said patriarch could get married. So the patriarchs, some of the patriarchs in the 6th and 5th century were married. Yeah, and that was the reason Marshamun, when he got married, he said, and that, by the way, that law was never declined in Lewa Shipa. So when Marshamun Gwere, it was a legal basis for his decision. Metropolita il Reshet Tupakia, he's the head of his province. That in the interior provinces, the metropolitan was elected by the people. So the people will get together, will say, we want this to be a metropolitan, and we'll send it to the bishop, to the patriarch, and patriarch will ordain. Except the exterior provinces, Antina Rifqa, the patriarch will elect anyone who wants. Mostly was from the will appoint, from Rabbane or Ane, and he will send it to them, and they will accept it. Why? Because he wanted to keep that connection with these people, and of course, Kharta, Mario Ala was Chinese. He was an exception. Of course, the Metropolitan, إلى قيوم Patriarchia, he is the one who reports to the Patriarch everything that's happened. He has to, he has the authority to ordain bishops in his church, in his, region, but gerek shaqal wa shumlaya min Patriarchia. And every 4 years, the Metropolitan has to go to the Patriarch to visit, submit his obedience to the Patriarch. Qanun for the interior, exterior every 6 years, and then they made it like every 4 years they can write letter if they cannot travel. Episcopa Kepaisima bin Metropolita was ordained by the bishop, by the Metropolitan Mahmiran. The bishop actually was the one who was in charge of everything. Like he was in charge of the schools, churches, priests, hospitals, there are monasteries in his area, not the Metropolitan. The bishop was the one who was in charge. And even he was in charge in the financial, but not directly through his archdiakon. Archdiakon was the man who has the key to the Qadilat Khazna, not the bishop, but he has to report to the bishop. Archdiakon was the second man, and was the secretary, personal secretary of the bishop, or Metropolitan, the Patriarch. Kurapiscopa Priadota was also ordained, who was one of the priests that was given the position to visit the small villages that the bishop could not visit and report to the bishop. Okay. Rabbanuta. How did the monastery start in the Church of the East? We have a few minutes left. Okay, if you don't mind, I can go over this. There are like four different channels, venues that let's say empower this. First, in 364 and 378, the Emperor Valens was the one who went back to pagancy after Constantine died. So he persecuted a lot of monks from Syria and Palestine and these places. They ran away and they went to mountain of Maqlub, which is near Nineveh. And according to Tomat Marga, the head of all these monasteries. It's basically like history of all the monasteries. So he's saying that these were the first group of the monasteries who arrived to the east. And there's another tradition that says that Mar Ogen came from Egypt, who was a monk in Egypt with Mar Antonius. He and 70 people came with him to the east, and they went to Nasiwin, and there is the Bangimana. They started a monastery. And like I mentioned before, there are some places that people visit. So some men and women dedicated their life and time to serve these people. They called themselves Neqiyam Ibnat Qiyama, and these became eventually like monasteries. And even there, but they were started. We don't know how, and there are some very old monasteries in the church. For instance, they're very old monasteries. We don't know how they start and what was their rules, but we know that they were there in the 3rd and 4th centuries. One of the biggest monastery in the Church of the East was Deir Isla. It's near Nasibin. and it was established by Mar Raham, which is considered one of the church teachers. We have Dukhrana, memorial of the Assyrian teachers, Ile Marabram Marnarsay Maroraham, which is this man, Maroraham. He was born in 491. He went to Egypt to observe, study this movement, and he came back and he established this monastery when he was 80 in 571. And this, of course, became a very great resource for the church leaders. There was another movement that started. They called them Salyanim. Salyanim were the monks who went visiting towns and preaching and asking, for help and money. But that was not the reason. They were condemned on the Synod of Markhasqiyal at 576 because they were very strict against sexuality. And some of them, they would cut themselves, so they cannot have, a sexual relationship with anyone. So even the one thing about it, which was against, this is against God's will. This is something that you have to do it with your intention and will. Not something you force yourself into it and by cutting your organs. One story, last thing about this, one story that is really interesting that happened in Deir Isla during in the 7th century, that there were some monks in this monastery that, the mountain was very big. So the one who lived under and the bottom of the mountain were closer to the city. And these were the beginners. And some of the beginners stayed beginners for the rest of their life. That happened. And these beginners, actually, they got married and had children. And they were living with them in their cell. And one of the days, Rabban, he has a very bad temper. He was walking around and he saw children. And he said, "What are you doing here? Why don't you go back to the town?" He said, "No, we live here." "You live here? What does that mean?" He said, "Well, this is my father, that's my mother." So he went, and this was illegal. Unless the head of the monastery died, nobody was allowed to ring the bell not on time. So he went and he rang the bell, and everybody came, and he made like a scene there, and a lot of these monks left. So it was almost like most of them left. Few of them stayed there. So what happened was that these people who left, actually they went. That incident, even it was a bad incident, but it has a great reward because they went and they established monasteries all over the areas. And we know that the beginning, before the Islam came to the region, there were almost more than 300 monasteries in that area. And during the Islam, there were only 60. So some people say that Holako was the one who destroyed, but actually when Holako came, Islam has done the job. Because they used to go and rob and kill and steal from the monasteries, and a lot of them, as we know, even Father John Vier agrees on this, that he says Muslim in Islam all these monasteries were under the jurisdiction of their bishop, except two, Deir Awe or because there was some problem between the bishop and the head of them, so they left. They made it under the jurisdiction of the bishop. Three things that these people contributed in the history. These monks, they start school everywhere they have like monasteries. So they would bring all the children and people from the town. It was actually like a recruiting program, but not intentionally. Their goal was just to teach, but it became a recruiting process. So they taught and educated people at the time that there were no schools. From these monasteries, there was a lot of great leaders came to the church. Marbawe Rabba, Mar Ishoyo Titaya, and hundreds of them. And the biggest contribution that they had, that they became the missionaries of the church, who went to China and Mongolia and India and all these places. The patriarch sent them. So, because of their obedience and their loyalty to the patriarch and to the church was spread into all over the area in the East, Middle East and Far East, and all these bishops and all these dioceses were under one central power and authority of the patriarch in Sada Protestant. Thank you very much. So next week we will talk, you read in the book of Vine about Nestorianism, and then we will go over the division, how our church, how to choose this, what stand to take, and then you go maybe till the Abbasian time, okay? The division.